You are listening to the ATM Marketplace podcast. Are you a bank looking for a best-in-class multi-vendor ATM software solution? Then you should talk to Cal. With more than 300,000 installations across 92 countries, you'll be in expert hands. Visit KAL.com to find out more about our world-class solutions and discover how you can transform the speed and availability of your network today.
Hello, and welcome to the ATM Marketplace podcast. I'm your host, Suzanne Clucky. I spoke with Aravinda Korala, founder and CEO of KAL ATM Software, about the company's unique new solution, OS Virtualization. Aravinda explained what this technology can mean for ATM deployers migrating to Microsoft Windows 10 before support for Windows 7 ends in January 2020. The shift from XP to Windows 7 in 2014 cost the global industry billions of dollars for unavoidable hardware upgrades. Banks are about to run into the same issue again in the upgrade to Windows 10. But this time there is OS Virtualization. It uses a technology known as Hypervisor to separate the hardware motherboard from the operating system so that software drivers that are unsupported under Windows 10 can be supported by the Hypervisor software instead. Hypervisor technology removes the need to upgrade current hardware when ATMs move to Windows 10, protecting the ATM deployer's investment in software and hardware while remaining compliant with PCI. In our discussion, Aravinda provided a much more comprehensive view of the technology and what it means to owners of ATMs that run on the Windows operating system. When we come back, Aravinda will provide a much more comprehensive view of the technology and what it means to owners of ATMs that run on Windows operating system.
Enforced hardware upgrades are a long-standing and painful problem for the ATM industry. But now there's a solution. OS Virtualization will open your eyes to an exciting alternative that brings freedom at last from enforced, costly, and disruptive hardware upgrades. Visit KAL.com/hypervisor to find out more, or get in touch at info@KAL.com today.
Welcome back. I'm here with Aravinda Korala to talk about the new Hypervisor solution from KAL. I wanted to start, Aravinda, just by getting some background on KAL, the company, and the other software that you have developed, just to give people who are not familiar with the company some context.
Okay, sure. So thank you, Suzanne. So KAL is an ATM software company. I think you've known us for a long time. We've been in the market for a very long time as well. Company is going to be 30 years old this year. And what we do is ATM software. We do ATM software globally. We have a global customer base. Our software is running in more than 100 countries today. Some of those customers are direct. In other words, we work with them directly under contract, and others are indirect. We have resellers around the world who resell our software. So now when we say ATM software, what does that mean? ATM software, to begin with, is software inside the ATM. It's a software that does all the things inside the ATM. It's the software application, the management, the monitoring, all the things that you need to do within the ATM. Of course, our software sits above Windows. The one piece that we need to have in addition to our software in an ATM to run that are the things that are called the XFS drivers that need to come from the hardware manufacturers. And the main reason for that is that they mandate that is the way it should happen. Having said that, KAL develops those drivers as well, where we are able to do that. So a lot of hardware, those drivers come from us as well, in which case all of the software is from KAL, but where the hardware manufacturer says they will do those drivers, then we need those drivers in order to do the ATM software. So it's not just the ATM software we do, because we said the software inside the ATM, but we also do the software at the bank data center that initially would do the monitoring and the management of that ATM.
The software sitting on top of Windows. How does that work exactly for the uninitiated?
Of course, Windows is the operating system that runs inside PCs. ATMs have little PCs inside. So there's a PC and all the other components like card readers and so on are connected to that PC. These are specialist PCs designed, for that ATM environment. But at the end of the day, it's a kind of PC. It has a PC motherboard inside and so on. If you look at the layers of hardware and software, there is the hardware motherboard and the components of the hardware. And then on top of that, there is Windows. And on top of that, the hardware manufacturer would normally deliver drivers, and these are called XFS drivers. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the software inside an ATM would be from Cal, if it is a Cal customer, or from other companies that also do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. How many companies are there in the market who are doing this kind of software, and how agnostic are the software programs typically?
Right. So, multi-vendor ATM software is one of the big things that happened in the last 10 years.
Right.
And we were one of the leaders with multi-vendor ATM software. We can work very hard to make sure that banks could see the benefits of that. Most banks have now moved to multi-vendor ATM software. Mm-hmm. In terms of market share, if we take the numbers from RDR, Cal, NCR, and Diebold Nixdorf approximately have equal market share and are the top three companies. And together, the global install base is about 65%, with about equal market share between NCR, Diebold Nixdorf, and Cal. Okay. 4 years ago, we held number one position. 2 years ago, we dropped to number two position. But hopefully, we're hoping that the next estimate will be back up to number one again. Okay. So, and there are several other companies as well, and they have much smaller market share, and some of them are very regional. So, mm-hmm. There's a company, for example, that only does business in Germany, for instance.
Okay. So tell me a little about the genesis of Hypervisor and how we got to from where we were with software and on all the system upgrades with Windows, how we got from there to this new program or this new platform, Hypervisor, that you've developed.
Right. So in 2014, you'll remember that Microsoft de-released Windows XP, and everybody globally had to move from XP to Windows 7. Mm-hmm. And that move was necessary because without moving to 7, if you continue to run Windows XP, there wouldn't be support from Microsoft. Mm-hmm. Now, that might be all right for your home PC. You might say, well, it kind of works okay, and I'll continue to use it. And that might still be okay with certain business users who might say, well, I'll keep running it until it fails, and then I'll think about it. But in our industry, in the banking industry, we're not allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. The reason we are not allowed to do that, as you know, there is a famous standard called PCI. PCI requires that you have only supported software inside your ATM, and not just ATM, but all of your banking infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. And that's necessary because if you don't have supported software, if there is a big outbreak of malware that attacks an ATM or that attacks a PC operating system, then if you don't have a support contract, you don't have a method to go and get that changed and modified, because you can't go to the vendors and say, please give me the latest version that fixes that weakness, because you don't have a support contract.
Yes.
So especially in the West, banks have complied with that. And in 2014, all the banks spent literally billions of dollars upgrading their ATM hardware because they had to do that. There is no option when you need to upgrade from a particular operating system to another because there is no support. There has been no option other than to go through that upgrade process. In 2014, the cost was billions of dollars globally, billions of dollars, because it is not a cheap thing to change the motherboard of an ATM, but it's not just the motherboard. Quite often, when you do that, if you have ATMs that are old enough that that motherboard doesn't fit anymore, then you have to buy a whole new ATM. So now we're talking $10,000, $20,000. And then, if it's through the wall, if it's in Manhattan, can you imagine what it takes to do all of that, right? That's significant cost. So in 2014, Suzanne, we started looking at this because our bank customers were saying, this is terrible, never again, we don't want to do that again. We knew that, of course, Windows 10 was coming in 2020, And they said, there's no way we're going to do that again. And amazingly enough, it looks like we're going to have to do that again. So we spent a lot of time trying to understand what the root cause was, and then trying to find out whether there's a way in which it would be possible to upgrade to Windows 10 without having to change the ATM hardware.
Okay. So tell me then, what is Hypervisor? How does it do that?
Right. So the really interesting thing about the Hypervisor is that it allows you to, if you like, mix two operating systems. You can have Linux and Windows both inside the ATM at the same time. That's the thing that makes a hypervisor special. Okay, a hypervisor is something that allows you to install one operating system and then run another operating system as a virtual machine, right? So our proposal that solves this upgrade problem is to install Linux on the ATM and then run Windows 10 as a virtual machine inside Linux. Now, why does that solve the problem? Linux solves this specific problem, Suzanne, because Linux has a different business model than Windows, as you know. It's open source. What open source means is that all the source code of Linux is available publicly. On the other hand, Windows isn't. It is what is called proprietary, which means that the source code is available and used only by Microsoft. So you and I can't download the Windows source code. But with Linux, you and I can download it. Not that we know what to do with it, but we can download it and try to understand it and use it. But the advantage with that is that there are companies that are specialized at supporting these drivers that in a Windows environment, Microsoft and Intel and the hardware manufacturers don't want to support, while in a Linux environment, there's a whole Linux ecosystem where people are happy to do that. So we partnered, for instance, with a famous company called Red Hat. That's what they do. Their business model is providing support for Linux. It is enhancing Linux. It is creating new stuff under Linux. But above all else, being able to provide the kind of support for Linux that Microsoft provides for Windows. But of course, Microsoft isn't able to provide support for that old hardware because of details that we can discuss. But in a Linux environment, that problem goes away. Anyway, the upshot of all of that is that now what you can do is to install Linux, use the hypervisor to combine Linux and Windows so that they work together, run all of today's software in that Windows environment. And what problem does that solve? It solves the upgrade problem. You can use the same hardware that you have today running Windows 7 to run Windows 10 in a supported environment.
Okay, so this is where it gets complicated for me. The idea of still maintaining Windows 10 within this environment, but you're actually running Windows 7, correct?
No. Linux and Windows 10.
Okay, so
running Linux and Windows 10.
Okay, so Windows 10, is that operating then in a cloud environment with Linux?
No, it is running inside the ATM.
Okay.
So you've installed both Linux and Windows 10, both of them inside the ATM. They sit, if you like, side by side, or better to say, Linux is underneath and Windows 10 is on top. And it's a hypervisor that makes that possible.
Okay. And so what is the result for the ATM operator deployer?
So the ATM operator, it could be as simple as taking the ATM with its current software and slipping Linux under the mat, if you like, just putting it in there, and then boom, the whole thing is now in a supported environment. Now, I don't want to make it sound like it's a kind of a one-day job, because it's not. There's testing to do. And, nothing in ATMs is a one-day job, right? You've got to test, you've got to be sure it's okay. There's significant work to do in terms of ensuring that all the pieces that was working yesterday, it's continuing to work today. So it's a kind of a sort of a 1 month type of scenario, okay? You need to go through that process to make sure that it is all working. But it means that once you've tested that in the lab and you've gone through that 1 month process testing it in the lab, you can then distribute the Linux and hypervisor environment to all of your ATMs Theoretically, that can be done online. We do that for all of our customers. We can upgrade the operating system of an ATM remotely using CAL technology. Not all of our competitors are able to do that, just so you know, but it is possible, and that means that essentially you can upgrade existing Windows 7 ATMs to Windows 10 with an online distribution of this Linux hypervisor environment that would sit underneath the existing software.
Okay.
Again, keep in mind, you need to test it and make sure that's working in the lab. It's not kind of an overnight thing. But once you've done the testing and you're sure it's all working, then in principle, it can be a overnight type of distribution to an ATM. You still wouldn't distribute something new to all of your ATMs immediately. You know, we would always say, do 10% first and then 20% and so on. You need to do that kind of stuff, right? But theoretically, it's an overnight distribution.
Okay. And then, so you're operating Windows 10. You have the ability then to maintain the security, which is the ultimate goal of Windows 10 for most banks. And then you can upgrade, or you can add on basically additional functionalities with that?
Well, absolutely. So, I mean, once you've got this environment, it's like, it is today with Windows 7, right? You can do enhancements, changes, modifications, do Windows 7 upgrades, Windows 7 patches. Under this new environment, you do all of that for Windows 10, just like you do for Windows 7. However, you got Linux underneath, and now one extra thing that you need to do is you need to distribute Linux patches as well. So you need to distribute Linux patches, you need to distribute Windows patches. But essentially, after you put this Linux hypervisor thing underneath the software stack, you are in the same kind of world that you were in before with Windows 7, but you've now upgraded to the latest technology, and it is going to be supported for a very long time to come.
Okay. So from Windows 10, once you've upgraded to Windows 10, then does that negate the need then to do further upgrades? How does that work? So
here's the thing about Windows 10. Microsoft are going to send new upgrades for Windows 10 regularly. So these come in the form of what they call SACs every 6 months. SAC stands for semi-annual channel, so every 6 months. Or there is what they call the LTSC channel, long-term service channel. Those are going to come probably every 3 years, although in the past it's come more often than that. It's probably going to be every 3 years. So if you want to keep the ATM with the latest, greatest Windows functionality, the latest features, latest functionality, then you might have to change it every 6 months. And that's the sort of thing that most banks do anyway. So today with our Windows 7 customers, they change their software regularly. Some of our customers change their software every 3 weeks. We do releases every 3 weeks. Why? Because they're doing new stuff. Because they're trying out new things. Others do it quarterly, and so on. But it's that kind of rhythm, right? And from that perspective, it's not only the application software from CAL that they're changing all of the software stack. They're changing the Windows software, they're changing the hardware vendors' XFS software, all of the software, because you want to stay on the latest technology. You want to use the latest cool stuff, you want to use the latest security, and so on and so on. So that will continue under Windows 10. Microsoft's going to send out all these latest updates regularly. They do that even more often than every 6 months to people's PCs. If you've got a home PC and if you've got Windows at home, they distribute it even more often than that. Because where the software world is going, Suzanne, is into a much faster upgrade cycle for all these things. And that's really the direction of Windows 10 now. That's why Microsoft actually brought Windows 10 out. And you remember they said there isn't going to be another Windows. Well, the reason is they couldn't kind of say, well, we're going to change Windows every 3 weeks, so you're going to have a Windows 11 3 weeks later and a Windows 12, right? That was just not going to work. So they went completely the other way around, and they said, you know what, we're just going to call it Windows 10. We're going to keep updating it, and you're going to have these things called SACs and LTSCs and upgrades and so on that happen all the time. And if you are a home user, you don't even need to think about it, right? But ATMs and banks, we've got to think about it, because we can't just have the software being updated without somebody testing it. We've got to go through that whole process.
Right.
So obviously we need to take much more care.
What does this mean then for banks in terms of how they do their upgrades? Does it change how they do their upgrades?
It does, because going from Windows 7 to Windows 10, they don't need to buy new hardware at all. Does that mean they never need to buy new hardware? No, because of course, the ATMs that you can buy in 10 years' time are going to be much nicer and much faster and all that kind of stuff. But then when they upgrade their hardware, they upgrade it because they want to buy the new hardware, not because some kind of operating system upgrade cycle, which has nothing to do, if you like, with customer experience, right? Because in 5 years' time, the hardware will be better and nicer and better and nicer customer experience. So you want to do that anyway. But that's a normal upgrade process, right? You buy a new car because you want a new car and it's got nice features.
Right.
And, this is what, so the cycle for ATM hardware is going to be in that way.
Okay. And in terms of savings for an institution, what does Hypervisor mean for a bank?
Right. So if you look at the hardware upgrade cycle, like I was saying, it's globally billions of dollars. For a given bank, if they have a small ATM estate, it can be as much as 4,000 to 5,000 USD per ATM.
Jeez.
Now, if you're talking about bigger banks, Bank of America, obviously they have a ability to negotiate those prices. But if you're tiny, it's that kind of number, like 5,000 US just for the hardware part, and then you might have to pay some extra money for certifying the existing software to migrate it and so on. So significant cost, right? Mm-hmm. And then for the banks with tens and thousands of ATMs, then it's a very, very big number. If you look at the really, really big banks in China, some of them have 100,000 ATMs on their network.
My gosh.
So can you imagine the upgrade cost is huge.
Considerable. Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about the speed of the system with this Linux mat underlying Windows. Does it have any impact on speed and availability and all of those things that are so important to an institution?
Almost insignificant. This was really a big surprise even for me, because we worked on this for some time, and then when we tested it, it was a really big surprise that the performance impact was about 2%. In other words, really insignificant. Mm-hmm. People wouldn't notice 2%. 2% is not something that a consumer would notice. The startup speed is impacted a little bit more. So when you kind of start the ATM, power it up, it's a little bit slower because you've got two operating systems that need to start up. Mm-hmm. But once you start doing transactions, the impact is around 2%. In other words, if a transaction takes 30 seconds, then with this new environment, it would be 30.6. Mm-hmm. That 0.6 seconds is essentially not going to be noticed.
Right. Okay. And then also, in terms of future functionality updates, does this complicate those at all?
Well, you always have this extra piece of technology that you now need to manage, because you've got this Linux mat that you call it. I love that description. So you've got this Linux mat to manage as well, right? But other than that, no extra complexity. Now, keep in mind that in an ATM environment, there are lots of moving pieces. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you're going from one piece to two pieces. You're talking about hundreds of pieces to which you now add one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. I know that the ATMIA is working on this new universal Nextgen Universal. Yeah. How would this fit with that?
Nextgen started off as a committee about how do we solve this problem, and then it's split into two. One committee that focused just on the upgrade problem, and another committee that started saying, well, it's not just about upgrades, it's not just a hardware upgrade thing, but let's talk about what are the nice new things we'd like to do with ATMs. How do we connect the ATM to clouds and so on? So those two things are independent. The ATMIA Nextgen architecture has been published, and people are working on it, and it's going to continue. The Hypervisor solves a specific problem. How do we go from Windows 7 to Windows 10? And most importantly, after that, when we get these LTSCs and SACs, we don't want to have to upgrade the hardware every 6 months. or every 3 years, right? Because that might be necessary. It might be necessary to upgrade the hardware every 3 years under Windows 10 because these LTSCs start coming every 3 years.
So that really makes it, that really puts the hardware upgrade at the bank's option instead of Microsoft's kind of bidding.
Well, I think it's probably unfair to say Microsoft's bidding because Microsoft has to do new stuff.
Yeah.
They're not going to stop doing new stuff because we don't want them to. And the problem they have is that they can't support the old hardware because those hardware drivers actually aren't written by them. They're written by other people.
Right.
And they can't compel those other people to upgrade. So it's not in Microsoft's gift to actually solve the problem because the drivers are not theirs. This is where Linux fixes the problem because with Linux, the different pieces of source code in the drivers are not owned and managed by different people. It's open source. It's in the community.
Okay.
So Red Hat or other is similar to Red Hat can get that source code and modify that. And this is where the business model that is different with Linux has solved the problem for us, right? I mean, I don't want to say that one is better than the other across the board, but for this specific support issue, the Linux model is totally perfect.
Okay, great. What have I not asked? Have I skipped anything that we covered it thoroughly? Okay. I know that there's one question that everyone is going to ask and that you may or may not want to talk about, and that is the cost of implementation for the Linux mat, if we'll call it that.
Yeah, so I think that's, it's proprietary
Sure.
information, as you know, so I can't kind of announce pricing on a podcast, but if people want to contact us, we can answer that question.
Okay. And then one thing that I do want to talk about definitely is whether is this available now? I mean, if I have a bank, I can call you up and we can get this rolling. Yeah, great. Well, it sounds it's incredibly intriguing. It sounds like an just almost unbelievable kind of solution for this problem. So I can understand why Cal is very excited about it.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Aravinda, for your time today. And we will be back in touch about this subject, I'm sure.
Great.
All right.
Speak to you, Suzanne.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Shortly after my conversation with Aravinda, Cal made the surprise announcement that it would license its OS virtualization solution to anyone in the ATM industry, including competitors, because they feel so strongly about its value to the entire ATM ecosystem. You can learn more by looking up the Cal Showcase at ATM Marketplace. That's it for this inaugural ATM Marketplace podcast. Thanks to Aravinda Korala of KAL ATM Software for joining me for this episode, and thanks to you for listening.